There is no doubt that the main quality of the saxophone is its lush, warm tone and its ability to sing out. And this is going to be my main topic for discussion on this clinic album: how to develop a beautiful singing saxophone tone. Now, in order to understand all the problems involved in tone production, I think it's important to list them separately, and then we'll go into details on each one. Learning how to breathe with the use of the diaphragm. Playing with what is called an open throat. The saxophone embouchure, mouthpieces, reeds, and ligatures, the consistent embouchure, the use of vibrato, and the attack of the tongue. And now let's go back and take each item separately. To begin with, learning how to develop diaphragmatic breathing. There is more written about this subject than you can imagine, and there are so many wind instrument players who do not breathe correctly, yet this is the place where good tone production starts. To begin with, always have good posture and try not to slump. When you take a breath and fill up your lungs with air and feel your shoulders rising, this is usually a dead giveaway for someone who isn't breathing properly, especially if you want to play a wind instrument. And it is very difficult to have a good saxophone tone unless you have a strong, steady column of air coming up from the area just below your rib cage called the diaphragm. When we breathe with the use of the diaphragm, that doesn't mean that we don't fill up our lungs, but it means that when the diaphragm muscles are consciously used, it allows the lungs to hold much more air, and it gives us the ability to bring a much stronger column of air to the mouthpiece, and tone needs air support. Here is a good study for developing the use of diaphragmatic breathing. First of all, when you inhale, pull the air in through your teeth like this. And when you exhale, push the air out through your teeth like this, as if you're hissing. Now put one hand on your chest and the other just below your rib cage. And when you inhale through your teeth, try not to feel a lot of movement in your chest and shoulders, but concentrate on relaxing your stomach muscles, and as you are filling up with air, your diaphragm should gradually expand against your hand. When you exhale, the diaphragm muscles will push the air up through your lungs, making a strong air column. Here is a good way to practice an exercise in diaphragmatic breathing. Lie on the floor on your back and take a few large books and place them just below your rib cage. Then say to yourself, inhale, 1, 2, 3, drawing the air in through your teeth, and feel the diaphragm expand and gradually lift the books. Then exhale through your teeth, counting 1, 2, 3 to yourself, and exhale at the same rate of speed as on your inhale, and the books will gradually come down. Repeat this over and over, and eventually you should be able to breathe regularly with the added use of your diaphragm muscles. Remember that anyone who is required to have a strong, controlled air column, such as a wind instrument player, must learn to breathe with the assistance of the diaphragm. Otherwise, if we rely on only the air coming from the lungs without diaphragmatic support, the air supply we get is not going to be strong or steady enough to support a good tone. When the air leaves our lungs, it enters the throat area. Sometimes wind instrument players develop a problem at this point called playing with a closed throat. Now, this simply means that a certain amount of muscular tension has developed in the throat that seems to stop the air from flowing steadily up our windpipe and into the mouth. The saxophone tone produced with a closed throat is generally a tight pinch type of tone and not a free-flowing sound. I think the easiest way to make sure that you are playing with an open throat is to feel as if you are singing while you're playing your saxophone. In other words, feel as if you're making a sound such as this. Ah! And don't be too concerned with the fact that you don't have a good singing voice, but just sing out freely. Ah. Now, in order to sing out, the throat muscles should be in a relaxed position and the throat will be open. Feel that the tone you are making is an extension of your vocal cords and that you are singing right out through your saxophone and not just blowing a little bit of air into the mouthpiece. And now is a good time to discuss the saxophone embouchure. Embouchure is a French word, and it means the mouth area, such as the jaw, lips, and teeth. To begin with, feel that your top teeth are resting rather firmly on the mouthpiece top, about ½ inch from the tip of the mouthpiece. I say rather firmly because you don't want to feel that the mouthpiece is moving in and out of your mouth while you're blowing, but that it is being held in place by the top teeth and lips. If the mouthpiece does move around while you're playing, it's liable to make a strange sound like this, and notice how the pitch changes every time the mouthpiece moves. In order to get the feeling of what ½ an inch in the mouth feels like, I think it's not a bad idea to put a piece of adhesive tape on the mouthpiece top about ½ an inch from the tip, just so that you can feel where the top teeth should be placed. You might find that you have to take slightly more or less than ½ an inch in your mouth in order to get a free, open tone, but this depends very much on the structure of your mouth and the shape of your lips. But in any case, the piece of tape can act as a guide, and it should be used for only a few days so that you don't have to rely on it too much. The lower lip should roll over the lower teeth so that about half the fleshy area is turned in over the lower teeth. This again will depend on how full your lower lip is, and you may have to experiment on just how much to take. Bring your lips around the mouthpiece and surround it with an equal pressure on all sides. Feel as if an elastic band is around the mouthpiece, exerting an even, steady pressure. And it isn't necessary to think of a terrific amount of lip tension, but just enough pressure to comfortably hold the mouthpiece in position and not let it move around. Don't be too concerned with the idea that the chin muscles should be flat or bunched up. I think the important thing is what feels most comfortable to you. The last step in forming the embouchure is very important. Don't puff your cheeks. This might look real cool when you see someone else doing it, but it doesn't do much for you if you're interested in playing in tune with a good tone. So try and keep the cheeks right against your teeth when you are blowing your saxophone. As far as mouthpieces are concerned, I think it's very important to realize there are many different kinds available for students and professionals. I often find students trying to play on mouthpieces that are far from the type of thing they should be using. Professional saxophonists have a very exact idea of the type of sound they want or need for the type of playing they are required to do, and the mouthpieces they use are generally not the kind that students should work with while they are learning the fundamentals of tone production. Try to use a mouthpiece that has what is referred to as a medium facing, both in length and tip opening. And try not to develop your embouchure by using a mouthpiece that has an extreme facing, as it can cause terrific problems for playing in tune with control if your embouchure is still untrained. And while I'm discussing mouthpieces, I think that it's a good idea to talk for a moment about cleaning out your mouthpiece at the end of each practice session. Use a soft, thin cloth that can be pulled through the mouthpiece from the end that fits on the neck pipe. Don't pull the cloth through from the end that goes into your mouth, as you might wear off the facing of the mouthpiece by constantly pulling a cloth through from this end. Be sure to wash out your mouthpiece at least once a week with cold water and soap in order to get out all the particles that can accumulate inside, and never use hot water on a plastic, hard rubber, or glass mouthpiece, as the heat might warp the facing of the mouthpiece. Above all, keep your mouthpiece clean. I would also like to suggest that I think it's better for young saxophone players to use a hard rubber mouthpiece rather than a metal mouthpiece, as they are slightly harder to play with control. I use a Selmer C-Star metal mouthpiece for my solo work, but I would recommend that if you do a lot of ensemble playing, that you might prefer the Selmer C-Star hard rubber mouthpiece. And if you really want to improve the sound of your concert band or dance band saxophone section, try to get everyone to use the same kind of mouthpieces. If you have a mouthpiece with a medium facing, I think you should try to use reeds that are of a medium strength, such as number 1.5, 2, and 2.5. Many students are under the impression that the longer they have played, the harder a reed they should be using. This can be very misleading, and you might be interested to know that I use about a number 1.5 to 2 reed. If your reeds tend to be either too soft or too hard, you'll probably develop a sore lip. If this should happen, here's a suggestion. Take a small piece of wax paper and fold it over your lower teeth at the place where the reed rests against your lower teeth. This wax paper will act as a cushion for your lower lip, and many saxophonists use something like this if they have sharp or crooked lower teeth and they have to practice or play for several hours each day. Try it, and you might find it very helpful. As for the reed placement on the mouthpiece, take time to make sure the reed is placed evenly on the mouthpiece, with just a very slight bit of the reed sticking up over the tip. By a slight bit over the tip, I don't mean 1/4 inch, but the reed should just barely show above the tip of the mouthpiece. And now let's talk about the ligature. This is an item that gets very little attention from most saxophonists, yet it's so important to the proper vibration of your reed and the eventual quality of the tone that you're going to get. It seems to me that the main job a ligature has to perform is to exert an even pressure on the back of the reed, holding it firmly against the mouthpiece. I'm constantly amazed at how many saxophonists use a ligature that doesn't fit the mouthpiece well and doesn't even touch the reed in very many places, and consequently does more harm than good. In order to check the usefulness of your ligature, put your reed on the mouthpiece. Put the ligature on in your usual manner and hold the mouthpiece up to the light, and see if you can detect any light showing between the reed and the ligature. If you don't see any light, that's a good indication that you have a good setup between the reed and the ligature. However, if you do see light and space between the reed and the ligature, I would suggest the following. Take a very thin strip of felt and glue it to the inside of your ligature where the reed should ordinarily be touching the ligature. This way, when you tighten it up, the felt has a certain amount of give to it, and it will fill in the places between the reed and the ligature that were previously not in contact with anything. Now a more even pressure can be placed on the back of the reed when you tighten up your ligature against the mouthpiece. This little trick of using a strip of felt on your ligature should improve your tone a great deal, as well as make a lot of reeds play much better when you might have thought that they were not good reeds at all. I might also mention that the screws of the ligature shouldn't be over-tightened, as it is bad for the reed response and might eventually even warp your mouthpiece. Now we come to a very good tone study for your embouchure involving only the mouthpiece and the neck pipe. The purpose of this study is to demonstrate that you can blow a very steady, controlled tone without any wobbles. If you can blow a clear tone with the mouthpiece and neck pipe, you have good chances of being able to produce the same clear tone when you connect the neck pipe to the rest of the saxophone. Remember, you want to be able to blow tones that have no distortion or wobbles. If, however, this is the type of tone that you're getting with your mouthpiece and neck pipe, then you have good chances of having the same problem when you connect up to the rest of your instrument, and of course this can be a very undesirable sound. If you find that you do have a wobbly tone, I suggest you practice long tones with the mouthpiece and neck pipe for about 5 minutes daily until you can produce a clear, steady tone. Make sure that you hold the mouthpiece at the same angle that it is in when attached to the rest of the saxophone, and that you are blowing with air support, that your throat is open, and your embouchure position is correct. In order to have good tone production, you should always be thinking and reviewing the fundamentals that are involved. When you can produce a steady tone and are ready to start to move around on your instrument, we should discuss one of the most important concepts of saxophone playing called the consistent embouchure. This means that you should be able to play the lowest notes on your saxophone with the same embouchure position as you play your higher notes. In other words, you don't tighten your embouchure when you come up the instrument from the lower register, and you don't loosen your embouchure when you come from the higher register into the lower register. You play with the same embouchure. This is what a saxophonist should do in order to train the embouchure not to move and to also develop the same tone quality throughout the entire range of the instrument. Now then, the next statement that I'm going to make might sound a little contradictory to what I've been saying all along. But when you get to be more advanced players, you will find that there are times when adjustments have to be made by your embouchure in order to get certain notes to play in tune. This is called favoring, and it does involve slight changes in the embouchure, but this is not the thing to do when you are learning how to play correctly. Remember, try not to tighten or loosen, as the pitch of your instrument is greatly affected by any changes in embouchure position. Here are a few studies to develop the idea of not tightening or loosening the embouchure as you play from the lower register to the upper register, or vice versa. Play 1-octave scales fairly slowly up and down, and make sure that you have lots of air support. Always be full of air, because two very important things happen to you when your air supply begins to run out. First of all, your embouchure will tighten up, and secondly, you lose your concentration, so make sure you breathe often. Also, when you take a breath, try not to lift your top teeth off the mouthpiece, but keep the teeth on the mouthpiece and lift only the top lip. Similarly, don't change the position of your lower lip in order to take a breath. Start your scale studies in the lower register and try not to change the embouchure when you use the octave key. The use of the octave key should have no connection with your jaw moving up and down. If you feel your embouchure doesn't change as you go into the upper register, then try the scales for 2 octaves and listen very closely to your intonation. So the real value in this scale type of study should be to keep the same embouchure, to have good air support, and to try for the same color of sound all over the entire range of the instrument. The usual tendency for young players is to have a big sounding lower register and a very small pinch tone in the upper register because of the tightening up that takes place. Another study to check that your embouchure stays constant when you change registers is to play octaves back and forth slowly, slurring the notes and making sure that you don't move your embouchure. When you are able to control your embouchure, the time is right to learn how to play with vibrato. If you try to work on vibrato before you can play with a consistent embouchure, you will only complicate the many difficulties of trying to play in tune. Technically speaking, vibrato is a deviation or a fluctuation of pitch, and it is a musical effect. In other words, it's something extra that is added to your tone. When you hear a saxophonist playing, your first reaction to hearing the tone might be, "Gee, listen to that vibrato." Actually, this is not a compliment to the performer, because the vibrato should be such a close part of the tone that it shouldn't stick out like a sore thumb. A beautiful flowing vibrato can add a great deal to your playing, but at the same time an uncontrolled vibrato can only spoil your efforts to have a good tone and sound musical. So this is an area of great importance to a saxophonist. The saxophone vibrato can be done in two different ways, by using a jaw movement and by using a diaphragm and throat movement. I use the jaw vibrato and tend to think that most saxophonists prefer this method. The vibrato study I'm going to suggest to you is called the measured vibrato. It is measured in the respect that the player must apply only a certain number of pulsations of the jaw per metronome beat. This may not sound very musical and will no doubt cause some out-of-tune playing at first because you may have to exaggerate the jaw motion. The jaw should move up and down as if to say ya 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 ya. Make sure that it is your jaw that is moving and not just your tongue. Set your metronome at speeds between 66 to 86 and move your jaw 4 times per click and sing out. I'm going to use a metronome speed of about 76. Ya 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 1 2 3 4 ya 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 1 2 3 4 ya 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 ya. Once you can do this in a sustained, even manner, the next thing to try to do is to play long tones on your saxophone using the same metronome speeds of between 66 to 86, moving your jaw 4 times per click. Although you're moving your jaw, try not to disturb your lip formation too much. So here is a demonstration of playing long tones with 4 vibrations per click. When you can control the measured vibrato on long tones, then try to play long tone scales, giving each note 2 counts per click and breathe wherever you have to. Play the scale for only 1 octave and slur the notes, trying not to stop the flow of the vibrato from note to note. It's difficult, but with practice I think you can do it. and so on. Then play the scales with 1 count per note, and don't be too concerned with the unmusicality of this study. Remember, it's the control of the jaw that's the important thing. Ideally speaking, a vibrato should have about 300 to 350 vibrations per minute, which would mean that if you set your metronome at about 75 to 86 and moved your jaw 4 times per click, you would have it moving at an acceptable rate. The vibrato should have a spinning, flowing liquid quality to it. Of course, this is difficult to do when you've restricted its movements by use of a measured vibrato, but when you have developed some control, then the time comes to concentrate on the musicality of the vibrato and to forget the idea of having only so many vibrations per beat. This is called the transfer of motion, and it means that regardless of the speed you might be playing a piece at, that the pulsations of the jaw will be around 4 per beat, at the speed of 75 to 86 on the metronome. Actually, there might be 4.5, 5, or 6 vibrations of the jaw at that speed, but you must try to break away from the preciseness of the measured vibrato, as it can limit your expression and musicality. And after all, the only reason we're using a measured vibrato is to learn how to control the movement of your jaw. In the end, the vibrato we use is our own musical taste, and oftentimes we change the vibrato speed depending on the style and mood of the music being played. If you can master the use of the measured vibrato, you should eventually become flexible enough to fit your vibrato into any kind of musical ensemble and be able to match vibrato with the rest of the section. I think it is very important for saxophone students to become aware of the different types of tone and vibrato that are used by the many fine saxophone artists that have recordings out today, and to also study the vibrato used by vocalists, violinists, and other wind instrumentalists, as this can only help to influence your own concept of how you want your vibrato to sound. I would like to suggest an excellent study book at this time for all serious saxophonists. The book is called The Saxophonist's Workbook by Larry Teal, who teaches saxophone at the University of Michigan School of Music, and it is published by the University Music Press in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Many of these studies are directly concerned with training the consistent embouchure, as well as how to develop your tone and vibrato, and I would like to demonstrate several of them for you. The first paragraph in this book is concerned with tone development, and I quote, "We should always strive for a better sound, whether the written notes are to be played fast or slow. They should also be played with correct intonation and a clean technique." I think this is an excellent comment. There is a tone and vibrato study on page 4 of the workbook using descending scales, and as I've mentioned before, try to feel that you are playing as though you are singing through your instrument, and let the vibrato spin and flow. All the notes should have the same color of sound both in the upper and lower register. And in the upper register, the studies would sound like this. Another excellent tone and intonation study in the Saxophonist Workbook is on page 5 and 6, and it deals with the slow playing of arpeggios. The main effort in this study should be to listen to your intonation, to keep the vibrato spinning, and play with a consistent embouchure. The next section of the study continues. The final part of this arpeggio study concentrates on the intervals getting further and further apart, requiring that you pay even closer attention to your intonation, tone, and vibrato. If you find that when you release your octave key as you come from the upper register into the lower register, that there is a slow response and the notes don't come out unless assisted by a big movement from the jaw, then you have probably tightened your embouchure too much to begin with for the reed to respond as it should when you come down from the upper register. If you use a mirror on these studies, this will be a big help so that you can see if your jaw is actually moving. Tone is often hampered by a poor understanding of how the tongue starts a note, or as it is generally referred to as the attack. Not only does the tone suffer from a poor attack, but your pitch is also greatly affected, because it's so easy to move your jaw each time the tongue moves, and of course this is not a good way to tongue, as this will lead to notes being scooped, as well as poor tone and bad entrances on notes. A series of events should occur each time the attack takes place. They are: put your tongue on the reed, build up the air pressure behind the tongue, and release the tongue. So actually, we do not attack the reed with our tongue to start a tone, but we release the tongue from the reed. Now let's go back and take apart each step in a good attack. There can be many different places where the point of contact takes place between the tongue and the reed. I prefer to use what is called the anchor tongue. This means that the tip of the tongue should rest on or near the inside of the lower teeth. The tongue should bend forward and the tip of the reed should touch slightly back from the tip of the tongue. It isn't a good idea to have the tongue touch too far underneath the reed, as this can produce a rather unmusical sounding slap tongue and can cause a great deal of jaw movement. Next, air pressure from the diaphragm is brought right to the reed, except no air can enter the mouthpiece because of course your tongue is in the way. Then the tongue is quickly released from the reed, which enables the reed to start to vibrate. Now, in order to stop a tone, you can either put your tongue back on the reed or simply stop blowing. Also, be sure to tongue lightly, as a heavy use of the tongue can cause embouchure changes as well as a rather unmusical sound. And now let's go back for a moment and review the important items involved in good tone production. And I might add that one is just as important as the other. They are breathing from the diaphragm, playing with an open throat, using a good embouchure, the proper choice of mouthpieces and reeds, playing with a consistent embouchure, the vibrato, and the attack of the tongue. In conclusion, I would like to say that it can be very dangerous to think that there is one way and only one way to do things. The ideas I've suggested to you are ones that seem to have had a measure of success for me and some of my students. But there are certainly many other approaches that are used that merit your attention. The important thing that counts are the results that you obtain.